Okay, so Bruce, I'm gonna bring you in as a panelist. Okay, so make sure I have everyone and then we will get rolling here. Okay, I have Sue coming in. So thanks for your patience. I want to make sure that our entire committee is allowed into the room. And then when you get into the room, if you are a committee member, it's going to make you a co-host so that your screen can be on for us so that when we're having conversation, that is a component we want happening. Sue, I've promoted you to panelist. I'm just referencing our team here on the sheet just to make sure I have everyone. I'm still missing a few. I'm refreshing as much as I can. Okay. So I'm checking our list and we're missing about half of the people that have signed up for it. I want to make sure I give them a couple more minutes so that they can get in here because I know how technology can work for us at that last second. Zoom always wants to update. Okay. We will do a roll call here in a minute. I have 5 of my 11 in here, so. Okay. Gonna double check on some things, make sure I get everyone in here that's possibly available. If you are on the negotiated rulemaking team, you do have access for your camera, and for our discussion portions, we'll ask that your camera's on for that, just so we can have that conversation. Let's see, 1, 2. All right. Thank you, Bruce. Nice to see you. Okay. Well, we are going to begin. I will be continually checking our panelist room to make sure everything is there. We have 11 total, and we have 5 of the 11 for our group right now. So let me make sure I have a whole quorum of folks. I do not see some names that they were in for a moment and they are not. So I'm gonna double check to make sure none of our folks have technical difficulties. I want to make sure we get as many in here, so we're gonna wait a couple more minutes. Thank you all for your patience. I'm hoping today will be smooth and quick for us. Okay. Here we got another one in. Hi, Kristen. Moving you into a panelist, and then it will make you a co-host so that you have camera access also. We're getting there. I know Malit was in just a moment ago, so let's see if she can get back in.
I'm having a hard time. I don't hear you, Marie.
Oh, thank you. Well, then I'll go back over what I said.
I'll give you a second chance to say what you want.
Oh, good. Yes. All right. Well, thank you for that. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to the first session of the negotiator rulemaking for the English Proficiency Standards, so English Language Proficiency Standards. We are excited to have a quorum here, and hopefully we will get a few more of our attendees in. There we go. Thank you. I'm getting a lot of chats on the side, so I'm not trying to ignore you, but if you could message Michelle McCarthy or Stephanie Swigart during this, I'm going to be focusing on the slide, so you will not get my attention. I promise you that I'm focused on that. So I want to make sure that you're not ignored, but I got to focus on this. We can do two things at once. So if you could please in the chat put your full name as well as your role on the negotiator rulemaking committee, whether you are a parent, a school trustee board, school trustee, a native tribe representative. We have a whole gamut of people on this wonderful committee, and we want to make sure that that is in the chat and documented. And that will be a part of our roll call as well. This is being recorded. It is also going to be listed on the OPI website so that those who did not get to participate or view today will have an opportunity to come back and watch the recording. When you're speaking, please speak clearly and identify yourself. If we can have cameras on during the consensus portion, that would be wonderful. And you might be asked to repeat just because sometimes the sound can be a little bit tricky, or you might leave yourself on mute like I just did. All right, so we are going to begin our day. This is just our agenda overview. We will have a brief welcome and introductions of our folks. We will go through how to navigate the logistics of the meeting. We will first, and then we will confirm our facilitator by vote of the negotiated rulemaking committee. We'll briefly go over the roles, responsibilities, and the process of this. However, we will not go as in-depth as we did during the orientation. So hopefully everyone on the team was able to review that. We will then open public comment. We will work on consensus building for chapter 53-301 through 311, which is our English language proficiency standards. And the end of this, we will be creating the economic impact survey or study that will need to be done as a part of this important process. So by the end of this, we will complete these outcomes. We will confirm the negotiated rulemaking facilitator and establish your committee membership, which means agreeing that you all agree with one another being on the committee. We will understand the process of rulemaking and your roles on the committee. We will consider the public comment on the rules that are proposed. We will begin the rulemaking process through consensus on standards and create an economic impact study. All right. So with that, we will briefly introduce the OPI staff that are here joining us today. Elsie Arnson is hoping to jump in and join us as giving a brief welcome to everyone so that she can say hello and thank you for doing this good work. Dr. Mergel, she is here as an OPI chief, but she's on the negotiated rulemaking committee as the OPI representative. Christy Mockstutz is our assistant superintendent, and she is here for support and making sure we understand all the processes. I'm Marie Judas, the Senior Manager of Teaching and Learning, and I'm here for technical support. I will be screen sharing and going through all the pieces for us today. Michelle McCarthy is our instructional coordinator, and she is going to be moderating the chat. And she was also our support during the task force work, along with Matt Bell, who was with the task force as well, who started off this process. Jerry Harlow is in with us today. She is doing the note keeping, and Stephanie Swiger is able to join us as well. So those are Stephanie and Michelle will be the two that will help us with the chat as much as possible. And Diane Groves is our proposed facilitator for today. So with that, we have about half of everybody that is on our list. Most of us were able to introduce ourselves previously. So I just wanted to acknowledge those folks that made the time and effort to not only apply for this committee, but also show up today, and very grateful to have your presence and your expertise and your passion in this as well. So we have Amanda Burkhart. I do not see her present at this time. Sue Fury is here. Bruce, and I apologize if I mispronounce any of these. Do not correct me if you can. Bruce Tribensky He is here today as a parent for us, Sonia Verlanik. Do I see her in her attendance? I do not right now. Okay. Julie Williams. I do see Ragna Thorin Thompson, who joined us during orientation as well. Danielle Morrison, Kathy I'm going to say that one incorrectly, Milodragovich, Bianca Rakabov, Kristen Brick, Malit Slim, and Dr. Julie Mergel is our team today. And I'm continually looking over here to make sure if anyone else has jumped in as an attendee. So I will keep watching that. All right, so the first thing we need to do as a committee is we will have our committee members vote to approve or disapprove of the facilitator through consensus. So, right, we need to do this as a part of the negotiated rulemaking process. So Diane Groves, who you've had access to her biography, she joined us during the orientation if you were a part of that. But we will call for approval or disapproval of her as the proposed facilitator. So at this time, okay, thank you. At this time, I'm going to ask my committee members if they vote to approve or disapprove of Diane Groves as our facilitator. So I will ask you to unmute yourself for this part. And I'm just going to go down the panelist list to make sure that I get all of our members. So Bruce.
Approve.
Approve. Thank you. Kathy.
Approve.
Thank you. Kristen.
Approve.
Thank you. Ragna.
Approve.
Thank you. Keep going down. Julie.
Approve.
And then Sue.
Approve.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone? The names were jumping around, but I think I got our entire group. Kristen, did I get you in there? Yes. Perfect. All right. So with that, I get to be a little bit more quiet, and Diane is going to take over the facilitation for us now.
Good afternoon. I'm Diane Groves. I appreciate being approved. I look forward to helping you serve as your facilitator as you move towards consensus. One of the next thing we have to do then is that now you have a facilitator, but we need to confirm this committee. And Marie said we have a quorum, so we can move forward with that now. Those who have, we did roll call, so those who are on roll call, is there any dissent to confirming this committee for the negotiated rulemaking committee today? Any dissent from that? Just raise your hand and we'll make sure that we get to you. And I assume someone's helping me because I can't see everyone. Is there any hands raised? If you have your hand raised, go ahead and unmute and say so. Any dissent? Okay, appears we've had our first consensus that this is the confirmed committee, and we assume that everyone went through the orientation video, but we do want to just very briefly go through those the rule-making roles and responsibilities, and just take a look at that process before we move to public comment and then discussion around the worksheets that are available. So I think that you have a slide for them to look at. It's really important to understand that we are part early on for the whole rulemaking process. And if you looked at the, which I'm sure you did, the website that's been created specifically for English language proficiency standards, it gave a timeline and it talked about, what happens first. And so there's research and review, and a task force is having discussion and coming up with some recommended amendments, and then it goes to the superintendent of public instruction, and then it comes to us. And so work has been done, and what we're looking at has a history. And so there we go. That's what I'm hoping for right there. And so this essentially is the beginning. a need is determined by OPI for the Superintendent of Public Instruction, and that team or that task force is convened and they do some work to get that started, and then out of that a committee is selected. Well, why do we need a committee? It's because it's the law. And anytime the negotiated rulemaking process requires it when there's changes to school accreditation rules. And so that's why we're here. But I think more importantly is, why it matters. And it matters because it allows stakeholders from across Montana to negotiate these proposed changes or these amendments and come to consensus on whether or not to move those ahead as they are or modify them. And it's important to understand that without the negotiated rulemaking, public participation typically doesn't happen until after rules have been proposed. So you're in a very unique situation to be able to participate and have an influence while the rules are really being drafted. And so with that being said, it's important to understand that you are part of a continued process. And so you folks will come up with any of the proposed amendments you want to move to the next phase. So here's our responsibilities. Consider the proposed rule changes. So you've had a chance to see those and we'll pull them back up again. And then we'll consult and advise OPI on an economic impact statement or survey questions. We'll do that at the end after our discussion. And then OPI will analyze that impact. We'll come back to that and approve it to go forward. And so that will be part of the process. Now, when your amendments leave by consensus, they will go back to the superintendent of public instruction, and there's another opportunity for revision. And then it moves after that to, I think we're ready for the next. Oh, you already did it. There it is. Moves to the Board of Public Education, and then they will do work. Now, is there more than one opportunity for public input than just this time? Yes, that is true. That there will be. But our work is to come to consensus to what moves forward from this point. And so the committee will, consider the issues to reach consensus on these proposed amendments to the English language proficiency accreditation standards, and then we'll consult on that economic statement. So you can see how we fit into a much larger process, but it's an important part because it helps influence that rule as it moves ahead. Christy, is there anything you think missing in that would be good for this committee to know? Awesome. Okay, so here is the much bigger process, and you can see that as it moves in through there to this three-stage process.
We'll be back.
Oh, I'm hearing some. Maybe there's a microphone not off. And so you can see, the timeline, and that's important for us because we're part of a much bigger timeline that started a while ago. Let's see, the dates were January of 2023. And we want to be passing our portion of this on, by the end of this month or very near that. And so that's what we'll be working towards. So I think that's clear enough given the in-depth definitions and conversation we had around this for orientation. So I want to move to my role as the facilitator, and I am, as in the orientation it talked about, I'm not a decision maker, I'm not an idea person, very simply, my role is to help facilitate discussion and conversation and encourage you to make proposals that will move you to consensus. And so what's really important is for me to talk about consensus and what that means for this group. And so consensus means that there's no dissent by any member of the negotiating committee to move the proposed amendment to the next phase of the rulemaking process. So as a facilitator, I seek areas of dissent, and I do that in order to identify the opportunities to modify proposed amendments if it's needed. They may not be needed. So if you dissent, I will be asking you to provide a modification or an alternate proposal that will consider both your perspectives as well as those that you have been listening to. So it's really important to right now be providing the perspective and information that you have together as a negotiated rulemaking committee. So with that being said, information that you provide, we would like you to do that verbally. So this whole group will hear it and not miss anything into the chat, in the chat there. So share any oppositions you have or insights that might be needed in order to create a proposal. So once you land on a recommended amendment, then the expectation is that you truly have had your say. We will offer every opportunity for that, and we really want to and encourage you, because it's important to know about it right now. If we don't, it'll come back later. And so when we leave, it's with the understanding that there will be no later opposition to the amendment for which you agreed to move ahead with. So we'll give you lots of opportunities to identify dissent and opportunities for modifying the proposal. I feel like maybe I should stop. I think I saw a question. Is that something I need to?
I'm checking. They put their hand back down. So Ragnar, was that you? Did you need to share something?
Yeah, I guess I have just a question about some of the verbiage, but I'm not sure if that's where we are right now. So I'm happy just to ask that at any time.
I think go ahead so we can get clarification. Yeah, sorry.
Is that verbiage for what I'm talking about, or verbiage that we'll be looking at later, Ragna?
I think it's probably what we're looking at later. Because you're still just sort of setting up what we need to be doing. Is that correct?
Yes, but it's awesome that you're ready to go.
Okay.
Yay.
So when we are ready, I do have a couple questions that might just be clarifications.
Awesome. Well, we've got that noted, right, Michelle?
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so thinking about this process, so after you have discussed and edited, if it's needed, it may not be needed, then I will check for dissent and understand that silence is no dissent. So I don't ask, does everybody agree? I'll just be looking for the areas for which we need to do further work around consensus. And so I think with that, I'd like to talk about public comment, because part of the information, so in creating a common information base, you've received some documents, the work of the task force, and another place for that is to have open public comment. And we have 30 minutes for that. And we'd like to provide 3 minutes of time so that we can listen to the people who have joined us to provide some comments. And I think Marie will be looking to see if there's any emails, and I will read those statements after we have heard those who are attending live here. And that way those will be in the record, and you will have that information in the room before you have your discussions. And I really want to emphasize how important it is for the public and other stakeholders to have a chance to provide you with this information perspectives, create that common information base on these proposed amendments. We're grateful for those of you who are here from the public and are willing to participate, and we welcome the comments that you provide to this committee as they do their work. And so with that, I believe that we have a way to have a timer visual so you can sort of see where you're at and be able to gauge your statements so that we get to hear what it is that you came for. So just raise your hand and we'll sort of stack you as you let us know you want to be heard around English language proficiencies amendments.
So Diane, I do not have any emailed public comments, and I only have one attendee, which is Chris Stockton. Chris, I did message, and I believe you can respond, so I'll make sure you have the ability. Did you have a public comment, Chris? Okay. With that, I do not believe we have any public comment today, Diane.
Okay, well, I'd say, Ragna's waiting and I agree with her. Let's get started. So if you would pull up those documents, Marie, and I think we'll go through all of the documents to begin with, just so we kind of see what we have, and then we will come back to the one that we are working on. Oh, yeah.
I was just going to share that all of these documents can be found on our homepage, which was linked to everybody within the committee and is on the OPI website as well. So let me get this working document up for us and shared. I'm working on another screen.
I wonder if there would be value in just having a short break here so that people will be ready to have a discussion that's uninterrupted while you pull up the tables for us. So let's just take 3 minutes and we'll be back ready to go, and then we can have uninterrupted discussion after that.
Diane?
Yes.
I just wanted to circle back around that Ragna had questions before we get going.
I think she has questions about the language in the recommended standards, the proposed standards. If I'm incorrect, Ragna, let me know and we'll manage those questions.
No,
right
that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Thanks.
Okay. Well, you're going to be the first one to respond. Okay. We have you in line. And Michelle and Matthew, if there happens to be questions or clarifications, I know you were with that task force, please feel free to go ahead and respond and provide that information without waiting for me to do so.
This might be a stupid question, but
Okay.
Why does it say, and I know we are educators, but why does it say academic English language learners instead of just English language learners?
Okay, I think it's time for us to go through these then. This would be a good entry point. And I think I saw Julie maybe shaking her head to that if there's a question, maybe I should manage that piece of it. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look at the document that you have in front of you. As we discussed before, that this is work that has already been in the hands of others, the task force. And then for recommendations, by the superintendent. And so what we're looking at now is where we are in the phase. So let's go through this portion of it. So in this document, you can see that this is the current amendments, proposed amendments that have come out of the last phase, which is where it was sitting with the superintendent of public education. So the superintendent recommends retaining the term English language learners demonstrated in the WIDA, English Language Learner Proficiency Standards for adoption, which are research-based and inclusive of all English language learners. So the superintendent acknowledged the task force recommendations. So this is what she received: to consider the terminology of academic English language learners and multi-language learners. So let's look down to that first segment there that has the title of Recommended ELP Standards Aligned with WIDA. So you will see that it begins with the recommendation made by the superintendent that is aligned with WIDA and inclusive of all language learners. It says this: English language learners communicate for social and instructional purposes within the school setting. And you can see on all 5 of those standards, the same description, English language learners, is used, as opposed to academic English language learners and multilingual learners. So I'm going to just start by just testing to see if there's any dissent to the statements as the amended standards as written here. And that'll start our conversation. So Ragna, yes, you see your hand and we're ready to listen to you.
I actually have a different question, but I
Okay.
did speak to a couple of different people who are deal with English language learners. And to me, this is all sort of semantics because I'm a physical therapist and I'm more into biomechanics and that type of thing. But I did have 2 people actually bring up that they felt that MLL actually was more inclusive to our Native American populations. And so I'm wondering if there's anybody on the committee that can speak to that from a personal standpoint, because I think that that's worth discussing.
I can pipe in a little bit here. And I apologize. This is a really formal process for me. So I'm sure I'm going to screw up some level of rule that I'm breaking. I don't know. So if I'm not supposed to be talking, somebody let me know.
You are supposed to be talking.
There
Let's
is
hear.
a lot of rules. So there's just, and if this is what you're asking, I'm an ELL instructional coach in Billings. And the multilingual learner term comes from wanting to look at our traditionally called L's as an asset-based. It's not necessarily that they're learning English there. We want to celebrate the multilingual piece of their world. And so that is where I believe that term, we're trying to use that more, although it is not familiar. It's like kind of in special education when they've gone from, the progression of, their different acronyms, but multilingual learner is really more favorable and appropriate in terms of describing all of our students who come to us with multiple languages or just more than one language in their world. I don't know if that answered that, but that's what I have to say.
Is there a reason then to have ELL if MLL is more inclusive and descriptive?
I think that the feds still use ELL, or they even use ESL. They haven't quite caught the ML vibe yet. Is the only thing that I can really think of, that it's not really acknowledged at the federal level that I have seen.
So Kristen and so I just put in the chat a link to the WIDA standards because the term multilingual learners actually comes from WIDA. WIDA is the consortium, the national consortium that sets the standards for English language learners, and is also the consortium research body that has helped develop assessments that help us determine the language proficiency of English language learners. And what you'll notice when you go to that is even in the WIDA, they really emphasize multilingual learners, as Kristen has stated, for those reasons, right? It's a value, it's considered an asset coming from that place. But what you'll notice is even in the framework that WIDA has established for the standards, they still use the term English language learners because it is all encompassing and aligns with federal language, as Kristen is saying, as well as all of those pieces. So even though they're encouraging us to utilize terminology, multilingual learners, and be approaching it from that kind of a guidance and value, if you will, they still continue in their framework, which they just updated in 2020. What I would also say is that the former Montana standards for English language learners were adopted from WIDA back in 2011. So when you look on our screen here in the right-hand column under E, those are the current ones. And those were copy and pasted from WIDA because WIDA is a really big research body that really can validate at a much higher level and lots of different studies, lots of different pieces to get to that. And so what you'll see is over here on the under B, recommended actually mirrors identical to the new updated WIDA standards. And so part of why we're here today is because the former WIDA standards from 2011, that framework has been updated. And so now they've updated the assessment that goes with it. So it brought us into the place to say, hey, we probably need to go back and double check. So I've said a lot. I hope that was helpful, but I provided a link there too if you wanted to know more information. But even the national experts still in the standards still refer to it as English language learners. Thanks.
Okay, is there anyone else who is hearing what's being said and might have a proposal for how we could move ahead with this, or any additional information or discussion that needs to happen?
Can we
Just
clarify?
raise your hand.
Can we clarify maybe the question about academic language learner? Does that need to be clarified for anyone who might not understand like academic language versus what we like a non-English speaker? Like what exactly does WIDA measure? Because that was a little bit new to, I think when I speak to staff around even our district, people don't understand that kids who sound perfectly fluent in English aren't necessarily considered because of academic language. Is that something that needs to be clarified for maybe people who don't understand what academic language proficiency means?
Yes, please clarify that because it doesn't say that anyplace else, academic English language learners. It just says English language learners. So if you could clarify that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, so research suggests that academic language and proficiency in language, and OPI jump in if I'm misspeaking, but this is how we pitch it in Billings anyway, because this is our understanding. When academic language, so the language of science, the language of math, the language of all content areas, if kids have a good grasp of how to utilize academic language in their writing and their reading and their speaking, their listening, then they increase their chances incredibly of being able to be successful in a classroom and post-education settings. It gives them a fair shot at being able to be on the same level playing field with their their peers. So when we have students who have a second language involvement, whether it be our indigenous population of students or families who have Spanish speaking, grandparents or parents in the home, but the kid comes to school and sounds good or sounds perfectly English speaking, it's not about English fluency that we measure proficiency by. It's about their use of academic language in the classroom. That's what WIDA measures. And so that is really what proficiency looks like as we test and what we measure for academic or for language proficiency well, I think across the board, that's what we measure, not how well they speak English, but how they use academic language in the classroom. Is that correct, OPI? Is that what you think too?
So, Kristen, I think you did a fabulous job of kind of describing what we mean by academic language.
Okay.
Mhm. But I'm not familiar with using it in front of the term of learner because we're all language learners and we do learn language for multiple reasons, even social reasons, right? Beyond academics. So what I would say is I think you captured kind of the notion of academic language, what we mean by that. Mhm.
Okay, I'm going to just provide another and encourage another opportunity if someone feels the need for further discussion or clarification. If you have a proposal for how we could move ahead with this, now would be the time to do that.
I am just curious if WIDA makes the suggestion or potentially likes the use of multilingual learners, and that seems to describe students who come to the classroom more as an asset, and potentially that's where we're going even on federal recommendations. Is there a reason to go to, since we're doing this in 2023 and not in 2020, is there a reason not to just set it up moving forward as multilingual learners and sort of be on the forefront of that, since we're going to all this work to begin with? Does that make sense?
Does someone have a response?
I love
Bruce?
that idea. It's, the question, I think the question that we're trying to deal with is, do we agree that the language should be changed? The English language learners should be replaced by the academic English language learners and multilingual learners, right? And so the reason to replace it would be, as I've heard, is that it's more inclusive, it's kind of more modern, it's like a little bit more enlightened or aware, and the reasons, and so that's kind of the question, right? Am I right about that? Change the language, change that label, or don't change the label, leave it the way it is. And I think because WIDA, what we've heard is that WIDA is, the evidence is they're on their way to changing the label across their entire recommendations, that we could just jumpstart that a little bit and not have to change it later after WIDA changes it in their proposals.
Do we know, Bruce, this is Julie, do we know that WIDA intends to change it? I have no indication that they're planning to change their standards the way that it's
I'm just guessing, because what we've heard here was that they use that every place else, or they use it in other places in their standards, but they haven't replaced it in the official list of standards or something.
Mhm.
I don't really know the vocabulary, but
Mhm.
So a good question to consider. I see Danny Morrison. Thank you for joining us, Danny. We're glad to have you here. One of the things that I'm hearing is people are asking the question about, well, would there be, what might be the harm or confusion of changing or not changing? And so, you might add that to your discussion in terms of, aligning them to say what WIDA currently says, or having them use a different beginning statement. So put that in sort of into your discussion pool. Danny?
Yeah, hi. I really apologize. And I've been on for a few minutes here, but I did miss the original question, and so I do apologize for asking. I'm just trying to put things together here and really understand what is being asked.
Let me just very briefly, what people are sort of considering where to go next.
Yes.
What you're looking at here, Danny, is you can see number 1 in the top left corner. So what sits in front of us is sort of moving into the phase of negotiated rulemaking committee. There's been a task force that made some recommended or some proposed amendment changes. The superintendent of public instruction. Then the next place is that superintendent revises those. So what you're looking at here is where it currently sits after that stage. So the superintendent recommends to retain the term English language learners demonstrated in WIDA, English language learner proficiency standards for adoption. So aligning them with WIDA, which are research-based and inclusive of all English language learners. So then just below that is the superintendent's response to having the other label there. So the superintendent acknowledges the task force recommendation to consider terminology of academic English language learners and multilingual learners. So just below is the current proposed language or amendments to the ELP standards, and they align with WIDA. So that's the discussion that you're listening to right now. So those 5, yeah.
So Diane, back to Bruce's question, and welcome, Danny. I don't think WIDA intends to change the English language proficiency standards to multilingual, because they also have in WIDA Spanish language proficiency standards, which are considered SLD. So I don't know, I can't assume. And so I think that potentially could be a reason why they have kept it as English language learners, because these particular standards are for English language proficiency and they have Spanish as well. And that in these particular standards, when they go to measure them, they're actually measuring students' proficiency with English, not with multi-languages. Because we're not measuring their language in multiple, if they're bilingual, trilingual. So that's what I believe is the theory, if you will, behind why it is in WIDA still, even when they updated it and have started to move to multilingual language learners as an overall umbrella. They still call these particular standards English language learners. I don't know, Bruce, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, I do see Ragna's, your hand is up, but I'm unsure if it's up again or if
It's up again.
Okay, come on
So
then.
I'm trying to
Let's hear it.
I'm trying to make sure that I'm listening to people, but that because again, this language is all totally, it's sort of like I'm a learner with all this education language. But I went onto a education site, and it just talks about MLL is a term that acknowledges multiple languages and dialects, including those that are indigenous and built around social justice, in an effort to elevate these methods of cultural communication that have been purposely erased or looked down upon. And this is out of Wisconsin. It also is the most inclusive term in sense of multilingual learner can be a student in a dual language program who is completely fluent in English or learning a second language. So it doesn't just cover those who, according to language assessment, require English language but they need some sort of English language acquisition support. To that end, some researchers think that we will be, for precise designation of those with specialized services, to ensure that they acquire English. And this is the reason that I'm reading that is because this is sort of what resonates with the couple people that I was speaking to in Missoula who are involved in this, is they felt like they wanted something that was more inclusive and fit our Native American populations more. And I'm not Native American, but I did grow up on the reservation. And so I just feel like it's really important that we take that into consideration. And I'm not saying that I don't think that English language learners, I'm not saying that I think that's not okay. I just, if one is more inclusive and fits better and is where potentially things are going, it just seems like we should at least consider it. And I think that's sums up what my thoughts.
Okay, I see another raised hand. Is it Danny?
Yes. Yeah, like going off of that, I feel like, you know, there's already a stigma with ELL. There's already a stigma that's carried on in a lot of ways, being when a student is in the classroom or in a school and they're you know, labeled that, like they're already got it's a label, regardless if we want it to be or not. And so, and it's designed to help the student. However, like for me as a Indigenous person who grew up in Montana public schools and am a teacher in Montana public schools, across the reservations, like I think the biggest thing for me here is that it's not necessarily ELL or even multilingual learners and being all inclusive if we don't have anything to back it up with. Like that's the biggest thing, is like we need to put our money where our mouth is. So like if we're going to change this to be all inclusive, then what comes with that? Or what is our why in this process of saying we need to move it to multilingual if we aren't actually being inclusive and understanding the way Indigenous languages are taught and understood and learned? Because it's a completely different way of learning. The definitions are not one way, like one word or one thing. It's very complex. And so going to that point of someone having multilingual possibilities in their, as a student, like it's a very confusing space for a lot of people who grow up on the reservation, still going through public schools and having access to their native language, just in the way that people talk off the reservation, if that makes sense. Like when they're ready to go to college, they still struggle with the way they're supposed to academically write for school, because they don't have that sort of language spoken to them even at their public school, right? So like there's a lot of pieces here, like it just, it's like, is this just fluff? Are we like gonna do something? Like, what are we doing here? Like, are we changing it to continue on some good like critical work and research, or like, is it to make someone look good because we changed the language of what it says in OPI's I guess in all the policies or whatever wherever it's located in the schools and whatnot. So I mean, that might be a lot and it might be frustrating for some of you to hear, but like I'm here to challenge all of these things, because like I do, I'm here advocating for a lot of people who go through this on a daily basis. So just trying to expand our minds and try and think critically about this and be aware of these things.
Thank you, Danny. Bruce, I see your hand up.
That was great to hear. And I don't think it's the job of this committee, or maybe not the job, but we don't really have any authority over what happens after we do this. like
Definitely.
decide on the wording of the rules. But I think if there's language in the rules that can that have to be followed, then it might have a great follow-on effect of expanding awareness and maybe producing a little more money, but I don't know about that. That's all.
I see a request by Maria for those who are part of the committee. If you could turn your cameras on, that would be helpful to us. And I think I heard Julie's voice, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think Bruce, and I think the pieces that we're talking about are really critical that we hear from Danny and Regna, right? Like there's a piece around what is in rule and then and the standards and what is in guidance and how you do it. So I thought I would go back to just double check, why did WIDA keep the terminology English learners in this content standard, but have been pushing really to use multilingual learners in practice. And so they said that, it has the definition, and whoever was referencing Wisconsin, WIDA is really prominent in Wisconsin. So it's from the University of Wisconsin. So I wasn't surprised to hear Wisconsin come up. And so, it talks about multilingual learners being multiple terms used. And it says like throughout the field in K-12 education, you will encounter various terms to describe multilingual learners. And it goes on to describe many of them. It says, however, in an effort to encourage the field to use terminology that is asset-based and inclusive, WIDA has begun to use the term multilanguage learners. You will see them used throughout their guiding principles, throughout their toolkits, all of that. But again, they have maintained the terminology. So you'll see like guiding principles, values from WIDA that really stress what you guys were talking. But when it comes to the content standards for measuring English, they have left it as English. Because again, when we go to assess, we're assessing their English skills, not necessarily their multilingual learners. So it's kind of hard because it's all over. The better term is multilingual learners, and it's really important. And so I don't know if maybe there's a point where we could include something, I don't know, like an introductory statement above in the rule that describes something that encourages more of a term of multilingual learners, or says something like you'll hear different terminology utilized throughout guidance. I don't know. It just was a thought. Those are just my most current thinking.
So I just want to make sure, because I look for things that sound like proposals. And so Julia shared some information, and then she said, and as the WIDA does, it provides these guides, and that there's might be a possibility to keep these recommended ELP standards that align with the exact wording as WIDA uses, but to have I believe you said a pre-statement that expands and becomes the guide for English language learners. And so I just want to make sure whether I heard a proposal or not, and then how we might move ahead with that, sort of get people's response around that.
I kind of a follow-up to Danny, I think. Danny, do you feel like, I think what I heard you say was the academic piece of it might be part of what's missing, right? That there's that piece, and then going into college as a useful part of that language. Do you feel like academic English language learners covers that better in a way that you feel those services would be better backed up?
Yeah, and that's what I was also going to follow up on, is exactly that, is what is the purpose of changing it? What are the benefits of changing it? Are there any benefits to changing it? And how do we create a space where if we're recommending that we change it to these things, we need to have substantial, evidence behind it to back it up, right? And I do really like I'm looking at WIDA as well, like on the side here and reading on it, and I do appreciate its language. And as someone who, I mean, I'm working on my PhD in curriculum and instruction, and these things are important to me. So I do understand that, you know, like what WIDA is providing here is something substantial for Montana educators. But if we change it, I just feel like we have to have purpose. Like there's got to be a reason why we're changing it, and we have to be able to voice that in a way that can substantiate our reason, but also that it's going to bring positive outcomes towards our students, right? So like if we're changing it and nothing happens, that's what I mean. Like why are we changing it in the first place, you know, or hoping to in that way? And so academic, I think I mean, you know, I can't always get behind what researchers always coin terms as, you know, all the time. Academic sounds I don't know, like it's like, but the people who aren't or the people who do have multilingual, like aren't up to par with the people who are good in English, or like, you know, what is, like, we don't want to create more stigma out of changing it either. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know I'm probably just like overthinking this a little bit, but I don't want there to be any reason for her to like challenge us and what our recommendation is, and changing it. I just like to be like concrete and have reasons why and a strong purpose to changing it. So if we did change it to academic, or the other proposed was what again? Someone help me.
Well, currently, I don't think there has been a proposal to change it.
Yeah.
From what you're looking at right there, Danny.
Yeah.
This is really where you're having the discussion, and no one has made a proposal yet to change it. So your comments are just helping this group think through it. But if you did have a proposal, I'm listening to you, and if you could sort of bring your thoughts around, well, here's this language here, and I'm wondering if you have a proposal to keep this language, or I heard you say, well, if we change it, there needs to be a really good reason, and then thinking about when it goes forward. So
yeah, and I say that only because I'm on a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee for the Bozeman School District, and I was also on a curriculum challenge committee as well, and the community of Bozeman really rallied to take the term equity out of the language in our school district, because they felt that equity was taking from other kids. And so even though I see WIDA and I agree that equity is a necessity, we still are working with school districts who aren't allowing this kind of language to be in the school district without there being disgruntled parents, right? So how can we utilize this language here that's so eloquently and beautifully set for us, you know, to utilize when someone, you know, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to challenge, you know, like, okay, well, now you're giving more resources to, you know, like just being on those committees, you just hear so many things. And I just would hate for that to be a reason for folks to not agree with this, right?
So I'm going to repeat what I heard you said, and you can clarify, tell me I'm wrong, or make it what you're really saying. So it sounds like you did share a lot of information to why you believe this, that you're looking at the language and you think it's written eloquently and it gets to the point, and that this language here could be the best language, given that once it gets to another level, another layer you talked about in the school districts, that it could create sort of a block. And so am I hearing you recommend to keep this language that's proposed here in that first block?
Sure. I guess like I wish I would have had more time to consider a proposal, because I probably would have done a lot of work to offer something. And at this point, it seems like academic could be a way. But I don't want to get behind that, not having done a little bit of extra research behind that. So I'm happy to listen to what anyone else recommends and what they feel too, because I'm not trying to take over anything. I'm just trying, this is how I work through things in my brain, and I know that there's challenges and roadblocks for us to consider in this effort.
Thank you, Danny.
So Danny, I think what you're bringing up is so critical and aligns with a lot of the thinking that WIDA has laid out. I put something in the chat because I'm going back to thinking about, right, that WIDA is really advocating that this work be grounded in the thinking around multilingual learners in curriculum instruction and assessment. And it talks about that they had done a lot of work to really be sure that the belief system and the values of multilingual learners, that they're really best served in very rich contexts that are both linguistically and culturally sustaining for them in content and in just, social language too. But the piece that I think was interesting was the last sentence. It said the 2020 edition recommits to the belief by maintaining the 5 original that we see here in the recommended box and in the 2011 edition, while adding new and expanded resources to address updates in policy theory and practice, which I think is really important, because it's just as much about not just these standards, but how they get implemented, how they're utilized in the classroom with the students. And that's when you start talking about what's the best instructional practice or best instructional environment or tools, right? But that's not necessarily the rule or the content in and of itself. That's the plus stuff that comes in guidelines and support and frameworks and all of that. And so I wanted to kind of go back, because I know that at WIDA, they've done significant work to really think about the context and the relationship between language and culture and academics and all of that. But again, it said they recommitted to the belief of maintaining the original 5, but then really ensuring that everything that goes around it is really all inclusive. So I found that to be helpful for me to be thinking about where were they at on that, because they're the leaders in the terminology of multilingual learners. That's where it stems from. So so I think that what you're talking about is really super critical, that really all of this goes beyond, these can be things on paper, but it's about how they actually get implemented and utilized and assessed, and opportunities to continue to grow in the language development.
It's especially in assessment, because native language speakers, their assessments are experiential, and that's not often practiced in English. It's test taking, right, and writing, instead of having an oral way to express like what you know. And so I have yet to see very many people implement that into a classroom, to offer that, to give those kids a different space to show the knowledge and information that they do know in that assessment form. And so like culturally, linguistically and culturally sustaining ways, we have to be able to offer, like there's got to be a way to offer that kind of assessment for these students, because that's where it looks like they aren't doing well. And if they were offered a different way to provide that assessment of what they do know, I bet you test scores would be better. would be higher, you know, but we're still going off of the same sort of assessment standard, which is kind of, it seems like it just crosses out all these good things that we're looking at and trying to change if we can't change that too, or offer that as well.
Yeah, and I think, Danny, the WIDA assessment that actually goes along with the WIDA Access, called Access 2.0, is the most current measure that measures these standards. I think the beauty of it, it's the only assessment that does have an oral component. So students actually have to get tested in their ability to listen, read, write, and speak. So the assessment does include all 4 of those domains, but I think you're really spot on that many of the tools in which we both assess and the tools that we provide for learning sometimes do not always match up with the way in which students best learn and then how we measure that learning.
Yeah. Okay, I want to make space for Ragna here. Ragna, yeah.
I'm curious to know, and I apologize because there's so many pages of this. Are there notes as to why the task force recommended considering the terminology of academic English learner? And who was on the task force?
So there was a range of folks, Regna, on the task force that work in experts in English language learning. And so their recommendation was because they felt like it would capture more of our Native American English learners who may speak only one language, which is English. And they just may have a limited, if you will, command of the language. And so they thought, is there a way to kind of capture language learners that is representative of those students who may only then speak one language, may not actually be multi-language learners. And that was some of the thinking. But I also think that in that thought, right, on the same level, that if you're saying that they're academic language learners and don't kind of embrace the idea of multiple languages and all of that, I almost feel like it's counterproductive. It almost like calls them out and names them differently too. So I think that when we think about, as that task force language had come forward, the thought was, well, WIDA is saying that we really should be thinking about the most inclusive way, if you will, which is maintaining English language learners, which is broad enough and doesn't really point out differences in our language learners in the rule, if you will, for the standards. I don't know if that helps at all, Regna.
I think it does. I think I'm trying to, I don't remember the pie graph exactly, but I think we're talking in this discussion about, I think it was 3 to 4% or something of our Montana student population. And then of that, I think it was over 50% were we were speaking about Native American. And so again, if using academic language learners seems like it supports the type of language assessment and accommodations that we need to make for that population, then I think it's worthy to put it in there. And if it doesn't change it, like we can't make the rules, like, I mean, we're not going to change the curriculum and we can't change how people feel in a classroom, but it seems like this is the chance to change a little bit, just like make people go, oh, actually, they're not just learning language. They're not just learning English. We're helping them learn an academic form of language so that they can succeed in college and in a professional world. Obviously, they can communicate fine with their family and their community and their friends, and they can buy grocery, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about trying to do something different because we're in a school system. So I don't have teeth in the game for that, but I do think that since we're here doing this, it's worth having people think about and weigh in on that are in it.
Well, and the other thing, and I really liked what you just said, the way you described the academic, I mean, that's what the assessment is. It is an assessment of academic language proficiency. no matter if they are a newcomer to our country or one of our students who, you know, belong to a Native American heritage language. So it really, to me, an academic language learner is what that's what we're measuring. And it very much describes the assessment given to determine proficiency. When I go into coaching classrooms, my colleague and I, we are teaching them how to explicitly teach academic language because that's what they're assessed on. So that's my food for thought.
Kristen, I think
Okay,
it's a good point. But when you look at this, you guys look at 301, 302, 303, 304, and 305. These standards are actually saying that. They're saying we're hoping that the English language learners must communicate information, ideas, and concepts necessary for academic success in English language arts, for academic success in math, for academic success in science, for academic success in social studies. And the first one is more kind of the social, right? Around they must be able to communicate for social and instructional purposes within the school setting. So I almost feel like putting the word academic there is almost redundant because that is what it's trying to say. It measure is their ability to utilize the English language within those different content areas for academic purposes.
okay, I'm going to create just a little pause here. I see the superintendent has been able to join us for our discussion, and I just would like to give her the opportunity to welcome you, and we will continue once she's had a chance to do that. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Diane, I very much appreciate you. I thank you. Great leadership I've heard from Bozeman Public Schools in the manner of coming to consensus and understanding the good work. So thank you for being part of Team Montana at this. Everyone else, what a wonderful opportunity that you have. And I just got in on the very last end of it, talking about academic success, to make sure that students of all abilities, all learning abilities, whether it be through language, whether it be through any type of a curriculum model, to make sure that they have the opportunity to succeed. This is what you're doing. We had the task force ahead of this. Now you're in negotiating rulemaking. Just on a little note, when I was a state senator, this was my language. This was my bill to make sure that there was a transparent, very mindful and meaningful opportunity to really discuss what does learning look like at the local level and from a state level. The other part that you'll be working on is an economic impact statement. I firmly believe that if there's a requirement of a public school, that they can't just come up with dollars. They don't grow up on a tree. So we want to make sure that through your good work, you recognize what impact that might be financially to implement the standards. I did this for all standards, not just the ones you're currently working on. Thank you for your good work. Thank you for what you're going to do to impact students in that classroom, in that hallway, as another teacher recognizes their abilities. And Team OPI, thank you. Thank you for all that you're doing as well, and in chaperoning these great experts in their move forward. And Diane, another thank you to you. You've got a lot more homework to do, so I won't delay any further. Blessings to you all. Thank you for all the good work that you're doing.
Thank you, Superintendent. Okay, so I want to pick up on the discussion that where Julie left off and look for responses and any additional information you believe needs to be provided before we move to really taking a look at whether there's any dissent on the current language proposed. Any additional clarifications? Okay, I don't see any hands up. So, and I The only additional proposal that I heard is the possibility of some sort of a statement. I don't know what that is. So I'm just going to go with the recommended English language proficiency standards that align with WIDA. Thank you very much, Maria. And I want to just test, given what you've learned from each other, is there any dissent in using the statements as they are written here to move to the next phase in the rulemaking process? So English language learners communicate for social and instructional purposes within the school setting. English language learners communicate information, ideas, and concepts necessary for academic success in a content area of language arts. English language learners communicate information, ideas, and concepts necessary for academic success in the content area of mathematics. English language learners communicate information, ideas, and concepts necessary for academic success in the content area of science. And the fifth one there, English language learners communicate information, ideas, and concepts necessary for academic success in the content area of social studies. And I'm going to be asking if there's any dissent, and if you have a dissent, I would like you to propose an alternative that includes your perception and those in the committee that you are working with to move to consensus. Is there any dissent? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up here. Marie, could I just double check to make sure I'm not missing anything? If you have a dissent, please unmute and let us know.
Nothing in the chat either.
Okay, folks. Nice work. Good discussion. It was so interesting to see the depth of what you're really doing, how it moves outside of these standards. And Danny, I appreciated learning what you talked about for Bozeman schools. I was able to do some public engagement around those conversations. So I really appreciate getting to hear about that. So there is consensus with this group on number one that we were just looking at. So we're going to move to the second one now. And this one here is around the Montana English language performance descriptors. And the ones you're looking at below are from 2011. And the superintendent recommends moving these performance descriptors from ARM and into the guiding documents instead. The superintendent accepts the task force's recommendation to remove the proficiency standards from ARM and place them in guiding documents.
What would that
So,
do exactly?
So it sounds like that we've got a question for clarification.
Well, do you want me to ask it again?
Yeah, ask it one more time and I'll.
Oh, okay. What would that do exactly? What would the benefit of that be?
So I think, Kristen, the recommendation from the task force, the rationale is that currently in rule, there's not just the content standards, but there's these performance descriptors. And you're probably very familiar, Kristen, with the performance descriptors, right? That on the WIDA assessment, it scores students on a scale of 1 to 6 in entering, merging, developing, bridging, right? Those areas. And it's kind of like describes, right? Those descriptors describe, I'll use WIDA language, what students can do indicators, what they can do. And so it's very helpful for teachers to know and kind of the range or the performance that students or the results that they get from those exams, because it can help them determine the type of instruction that a student might need to go from, you know, emerging to developing or expanding. And we know that students don't actually progress through each of these levels in a, you know, really straight linear timely fashion. It can go, they can move through entering in 2 seconds and then have 3 years in developing and expanding. But the point is that from the task force was that this is kind of the outcome of the assessment, and it's really on our educators to utilize that results to then determine what they're going to do instructionally, and that they're really not content, rather they're kind of what you utilize. But it's super important to understand and provide guidance documents to our educators to say, when you get these results, what does it mean if your student scores in this range? What does that, if that's the range they got on this assessment, what is their command of the language? And so that was the task force's kind of thinking, and that then the superintendent did agree with was, yeah, I mean, these are really important and instructional tools that can help us with the assessment, but they could be put into guidance documents. They don't need to be in content standards.
Okay. Any discussion, comments, or clarifications? Okay, I would, oh, Bruce, go ahead.
So is there a difference in the like the legal requirements of the, or how educators are bound to actually, like, does it remove any constraints from educators by moving this from one document to another?
I think that's what I was trying to ask, kind of a thing.
So it gets to be really interesting with the English language, right? Because if we think about it in another content like mathematics, right? Content standards are what students need to be able to know and do. And so the legal obligation is that we really are very clear that we want all students to have opportunities and access to get learning opportunities to develop the skills and understandings that they need for all content. And these really are not content, right? We are holding our teachers accountable for delivering the content and providing instruction for language development, English language development, so that they can academic success in math and ELA and social studies. These really are not that, right? This is just really like saying, oh, you're proficient in, for example, if we were looking at a different assessment, for all of our students in mathematics, we say, well, you're proficient, or you're novice, or you're advanced in mathematics. That performance descriptor isn't really like, is information on how students did with the content standards. So most states don't have the performance descriptors in their content standards. They have it as corresponding support or documents, because this is not what we're asking teachers to teach. This is not the content this is actually what happens afterwards when they're measured. I don't know if that helps.
So are we kind of just correcting a mistake, in a sense? A miscategorization of these?
Maybe. Not sure.
I see Ragna's hand up as well.
I think it's just a follow-up to Bruce. Sorry, I'm not sure exactly what happened to my screen. I can't see everybody right now, but this is exactly my main point of clarification for all of this is if we're removing something from the administrative rules for Montana, I worry that takes away, it takes away responsibility of following up with that, and takes away people's the possibility of being able to seek out certain services. So for all of the students involved. I don't know if that was clear.
Okay, can someone respond to that? Okay, so Ragna, your concern is if we remove this, what might be the consequences for which it would get in the way of students having the supports they need? So I don't know. I don't have I don't have thoughts on that because that's not my specialty. But I do think I see Sue has her hand up. So I'm going to move to Sue and see if she can help us with this discussion. Go ahead, Sue.
I don't know if I can help with the discussion, but I think that's a valid concern because we have seen things get removed. And that's one of my big things reasons for being on this committee is we have seen things be removed and standards changed, not necessarily just with this kind of thing, but I'm not saying I have any solution, but I guess when you remove things, it makes me concerned.
I think I see Danny's hand up.
Yeah. I would echo that, Sue, in saying that someone who has found themselves so frustrated with accountability to educators and what they're providing and how they're doing it. A great example is Indian Ed for All. Like, it's mandated in the Constitution of Montana, yet there's no accountability or teeth to it to enforce that. There's no enforcement of it. Like a school can decide what they want to do for it, right? And so to me, like taking this kind of language out, I feel like it takes away accountability to the process of the like these are standards. They should stay in the standards because it also is a sort of accountability in the process of teaching and practicing the standards and doing a good job for our students. So to me, like I also get very leery taking language out and not replacing it with something else. Because to me, like this provides what I read here provides a sort of accountability aspect to the standards. And I see it as something that could be have more influence as staying than being taken out.
Okay, I see in the chat here, I apologize if I miss things. So there's been a definition provided, proficiency level descriptors. Describe a continuum of language development for activities that target language expectations. They provide detailed articulation of how students might develop language across the 6 levels of English language proficiency. And then Sue, I don't know if you got the answer to this question, but why did the task force take these out? And I do know we have 2 people that were part of those discussions. I'm wondering if this nope, there's not.
Diane, they put up on the screen a note in yellow there.
Very good.
For Sue, you can see that's the note from the task force as to why they recommended that.
Thank you. Yes. We'll give you a chance to read that and then respond.
Okay, and I probably, maybe I missed this. What's and you probably said this, but what's the difference between guidance documents and standards? Because I guess I'm more about standards being I don't know. I guess I'm concerned about guidance documents because that sounds very vague to me.
Mhm.
Okay.
One
Looking
thing I
for-
would say on this, I don't necessarily disagree. When I look at why the team chose, I'm just going to speak from the context of my job. When we present to staff, we say, these over here, the can-dos, these entering, that drives their scaffolds. So when I look at them, it's it is the descriptors for directions for teaching. And maybe that's, I see what they did, and I tend to agree with it now that I look what the difference is between the ARM and the why they took it out. Because that is actually exactly what we use those for, to drive instruction and scaffolds for teachers. If that,
Okay, and
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
you go. No, you go ahead. I thought you were finished. Go
I think
ahead.
I was done.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
So you
And then
use,
I see two hands up. A question, you want a question for that someone has regarding what was just
for
okay,
Kristen.
go ahead.
So you're saying that you would rather use guidance documents than standards? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know. But I'm just saying that I see when if my eyes are kind of bad here, it's kind of, I can't make this any bigger, but yeah, I mean, I guess that would be, maybe I'm just saying I understand it's more clear why they removed it when we're talking about why they would remove this, if I followed the conversation correctly as we've gone on here. I wasn't sure at first, but I'm like, oh yeah, I get the difference between the two and why they would remove that. That's really all I'm saying, based on someone who's actually used these to guide teachers in their practice for our multilingual learners.
Okay, so I do want to clarify that the removal also comes with a move as opposed to just a complete removal. So just to clarify
Yes,
that
yes,
that's
yes.
okay. Yeah. Sue, I saw your hand up and I think you just asked a question. Do you have a additional question, clarification, or comment? And then Ragna, I have you next.
I don't know if I had my hand up, but I don't have an additional question. I just want to voice my concerns when things move from a standardized thing to a guidance thing. Because I think that we need to, and nowadays we need to be a little bit more specific because we're questioned all the time what we're doing.
Okay, Ragna.
So I guess my question with this is if we decide to take them out of the ARM, and put them in with guidance, then what remains in ARM? So is there, if this is a performance descriptor, then are there things that are still left within the rules and standards that cover that?
So can
Does
you
that
go
make sense?
back? Yes, thank you, Marie. So the standards that you just came to consensus on, those are the ones that will be in ARM. And then these descriptors connected with that will then be moved over to guidance documents. Any additional questions or clarifications or discussion we need to have?
I think, Ragna, you bring up an important point, right? Is that these are the content, what we hold our educators responsible for doing is this content that kids need to know and be able to do these things in English. By removing the proficiency ranges, which tell us just kind of where kiddos are at. That's a continuum. We would never want students to stay in one of those or say, we want you to do this. I mean, so it's, I think in some ways they're just not in the right location, right? It's like saying, in math, if the content is, I want you to be able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide multi-digit numbers, right? We don't put in there, we want you to be going from a novice level to a proficient. We expect you to be proficient at that. And so that's what we really expect all of our kiddos to be, is at a level of a command of the language that they're proficient, that they can do these things. And so I think that what the team is recommending, the task force and what the superintendent accepted, I think is strong recommendation. And I kind of heard that from Kristen a little bit. Still doesn't mean you don't utilize it. It's really important. But the content in and of itself is the ones that we did in 301 to 305.
Okay, are there any additional questions, clarifications, or comments that you have?
I
you
think
Scroll
just
back
because
down so we can see. Thank you.
Thanks.
so to me the performance descriptors seem much more detail oriented as to how they will be taught and how they'll be what it means to be proficient in it. So I'm curious from our educator standpoints and from Danny's perspective, what your thoughts are on going to that very general part to be a part of ARM and moving this into guidelines, or leaving this in ARM.
Yeah, for me, I feel like this is necessary. I don't like overgeneralizing, and I actually like the language of the standards that we agreed on are really like minimal. Like it provides a space to have a spectrum, to be minimal to those who are achievers and have higher standards for themselves and their classroom and their students. So for me, I prefer to have this kind of language because I feel like it reminds educators that these things need to be implemented and not forgotten. So that language with the specifics for me is always better. It will always be better in my opinion. And that's just my opinion, but I don't see a reason to take it out. And that's my opinion.
So
Is it the how to though? To me, this is the how. Like, I'm just curious where things go, not understanding, you know, the ARM and then the guidelines. Like maybe that's what it comes down to, is where is this most quote, not even appropriately. I don't want to say that, but that, like, to me, that's the how. But that's what we've used them for in our district. So I don't want to take that away from you, Danny, or anything that has been done or anyone's experience. So that's really where I'm coming from on that piece. If there is a guideline between the what and the how kind of a thing, and that really is where I come from on it. So I would also support my team members here in not disagreeing with that at all.
Okay, Ragna.
So I propose that we leave it in ARM and not take it out. Is that, I feel like that's what we're all sort of saying, without just saying that that's what we support, but not actually just, does that seem right? Does anybody, am I not picking up what we're putting down?
That's
Okay.
exactly what I said. That's what I prefer is yes, that it stays. So yes, thank you.
Okay, so there has been a proposal to the current proposed amendment. So let's look at that again so we're clear about what we're talking about. So the recommendation was to move these performance descriptors you see below from out of ARM and into guiding documents. And Ragna, I know Danny was saying this as well, so I'm going to use it as one proposal. And then let's just see where the dissent is, and this will encourage additional conversation in another direction. So the proposal is, let's leave it where it sits currently in ARM from 2011. So is there any disagreement, is there any dissent to leaving the performance descriptors in ARM as opposed to moving them to the guiding documents? Any dissent to that? So we're looking for questions, clarifications, comments, and discussion.
Diane, this is Julie. I do dissent because I don't think these are content standards. And this chapter of ARM is about content standards. And so there was on the screen a few minutes ago in the chapter that this sits in ARM in 1053-101, what content standards are and what they mean. And so I feel like, and Kristen kind of said it, she said, these proficiency things are more about the how, not the what.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you what I was hearing that caused folks to want to leave them where they are, is that there is a concern then that these will get lost. And so I wonder if there could be some conversation around that concern that comes up for folks in terms of if they move out of the ARM, then what happens to them? How will that impact what we really want to have happen with kids? And if that's not what I was hearing, clarification on that would be good. I'm just trying to repeat what I'm hearing from the group. Ragna, I see your hand raised, so I'm not sure if it's leftover or new.
It's new.
Okay.
I'm just looking things up because I get and I found one definition, and maybe this isn't a great definition. Proficiency standards relate to the ability or proficiency of a student that they have in a language, and content standards relate to what a student needs to know about the content being taught. So content standards seem like we would want that to be a part of ARM. And I don't really get, I don't know if I understand totally the difference between content and proficiency and why it wouldn't be left in the rules, the administrative rules.
Okay, so let's just clarify that what we're looking at, that there's already been a consensus about, are those content standards. And what we're looking at now for discussion are the performance descriptors.
Diane, I'm wondering if a proposal would be to take a look at putting what we call program delivery standards in chapter 55 that go along with the content standards that live in 53. So hopefully my team can help me here. If you could go back up to content standards, let's pick I don't care what content, let's pick CTE. That's totally different than what we've been talking about. So if you could pull up CTE in the content standards for a second.
Okay, and we'll go slow enough to make sure the group's able to keep up with you here.
Okay. Because there might be a possibility of where it could fit. So you go to CTE. I don't know where that's at. And you'll see that the content standards talk about what kiddos should know and be able to do by grade level. So I don't care what grade level. Here's an example of a content standard for 5th grade for CTE, what they want the students to be able to know and do. Okay, but there's another section that actually complements it. So if we go to another chapter, which is actually ARM 1055, traditionally when we put these out, we update them together. And it's called Program Delivery Standards. And Program Delivery Standards talk about
And I do see your hand up, Ragna, but I'm going to wait until Julie has a chance to
if
work
you
us
go
through this here.
towards the thousands, it's going to be way down. What you'll notice is, you guys, is you'll see all the content. There's one for ELA, arts, health, math, science, social, and then there's the one that corresponds with it for CTE. And this is more the how. And what the program delivery standards outline is what we call the conditions and the practices that need to be utilized. And so this kind of sets more around what are the following conditions that need to be set and what's the practices that need to be utilized. What you'll notice in 55, there is not any for English language proficiency. Maybe it's an opportunity for us to think about, should we develop a simultaneously, since it's the only one that doesn't have it, some language around expectations on how it gets delivered.
It just feels like a better, I'm not necessarily, I don't like the word dissent because I know that's part of the process, but I feel like I'm just respecting my friends who really feel strongly that it should stay in standards. But it just feels more that it fits better in that how this section that you're talking about. It just, and like I said, it's based on what we do here in Billings with those can-do descriptors. That is where I'm coming from in my experience. However, it certainly isn't, it just seems more appropriate fit.
So I think I might, if it's not in ARM, then is it not being removed from there? Like it's not in there now, like you just looked through and there's nothing about English language learners in there?
I
Is that
know
It sits there now.
but if you go back
so
up,
we're not removing
okay.
it at all, it's just not there.
I think we're doing both. That potentially, I don't know. The recommendation is on the content standards. Do we leave the progression standards in there? I'm just pointing out to you guys that I heard from Danny a little bit around and Kristen and Regna about, hey, like, I feel like there's a need to kind of have some accountability. Danny, I want to use your word, to what is expected. And I was like, there's other places where that happens with our other content, not with our English language proficiency. We did add a piece into 55 on how opportunity for different types of learners, but that's not this, right? I'm just bringing it to your attention. Is it an opportunity for this committee to be thinking about, do you recommend simultaneously adding something in 55? Because normally when we add something or edit and update content standards, we simultaneously update the program standards, program delivery standards, if you will. But it's just an opportunity. I don't know that I'm saying we need to. It's just currently not in there. But we could recommend that it be added in there.
Okay, so here's what I'm saying is there's a proposal based on what is being heard, shared by other committee members in an effort to try and meet those needs that have been shared. And so if I don't get it quite right, I want you to help with that, so that this would be different. It wouldn't be moving it to guidelines. it would be to sort of follow the model for which you showed us from chapter 55, and they're not called guiding documents. I'm not remembering the terminology you used there, Julie. Maybe you could help me just real quick. And I do see your hand, Danny.
Program delivery standards.
Program delivery standards that would stay connected to the 5 standards for which you've already come to consensus on. Did I get that right? Okay, so Danny, your hand is up there.
Yeah. So if there's nothing in there currently about ELL, then I wouldn't feel comfortable taking this out and moving it out of ARM until there was something in there for ELL, if that makes sense. So like, okay, I get that it can be moved to somewhere to guidance documents, but if there's nothing in there now for ELL, I'm not going to feel comfortable taking it out and moving it out of ARM to guidance documents until there is language that substantiates ELL content standards, specifically in this process, if that makes sense.
Danny, do you have a response to the proposal of having it be under this new category of delivery?
Yes, because I guess the proposal is that that there can be that language in there in the content standards regarding ELL. Just trying to think of how I can say this. I'm like trying to formulate this idea here. I just feel it makes me feel uncomfortable. So I'm just trying to work through this here at the same time. So I apologize if I'm a little slow here, but truly the accountability piece is it's important to me, and I know that it is helping people or teachers build their framework and their lessons. If they aren't utilizing or have something to utilize and to see to get to the assessment, then how are we helping them, or how are we serving them to be prepared to implement ELL standards, right? If the language isn't there to help them understand how to build and scaffold their lessons without it, and they don't know to go to guidance documents, because I know plenty of educators who don't know these resources in general, like there has to be some kind of language there. So I guess my perhaps proposal is that there needs to be movement in creating a space for there to be continued content standards for ELL before we take and remove this out of ARM to guidance documents. I don't know. My brain is a little crazy,
That's That's okay. That's the way this works. It takes continued conversation to get everybody sort of wrapped around. So don't you worry about it. Thank you. So I see Ragna and Bruce and then Sue.
I'd second that idea that Danny proposed, that that these descriptors then, if chapter 55 under the program delivery standards, if that is a part of the administrative rules of Montana, the ARM, then that seems like a good place for that to go versus guidance.
Hey, Bruce. Oh, did you put your hand down?
Well, I thought of other things. I noticed that there are no performance descriptors in any of the other areas, subject areas. And I guess, are those in the guidance documents? And so this one is just an outlier? And then it's, I think while the guidance documents use the word guidance documents, so it implies that they have less force of law to, make something up here, then the rules, is that really true? Are they really, do educators not, are they not more likely to use the guidance documents than the reading the rules?
So I see Sue's hand up, and then if there are educators that could respond to that to help this group, that would be helpful. Sue?
Yeah, Bruce, that was a really good question. In my mind, I think that guidance documents are just more like a recommendation, or maybe this is possibly what you could do. But when I think about standards, I think that that's what you must follow. And I am concerned about changing something from a standard to a guidance.
Because right, like they're here in the first place, they made it here, so obviously there was a group of people who felt it necessary for it to be implemented in the first place. And that's like what I'm trying to keep in this like perspective here. But in working with so many different schools across Montana and building curriculum and lesson planning, the first place they will go is to the content standard location, because that's their requirement or accountability. And there's plenty of schools in Montana, especially on the reservation, who don't even know that there's guidance document. I've been an educator for a long time. I've never seen any guidance documents. And that's I'm just being real. Like I there's a lot of loopholes, and that's why I'm saying like there's a spectrum of educators who are in the know, and to the spectrum of being in the know and really trying as hard as they can to implement these standards in a good way to have great outcomes for their students. And so, especially with the lack thereof being any accountability or changing things up, standards are tough. And I don't believe standards are the way either, but that's my opinion as someone who writes curriculum and helps educators, is that you need to know your students. You need to know all of these, like you can't just implement these content standards without knowing your students really well. But there's a lot of teachers who don't even go that far in Montana, because we need educators so bad that we have a lot of people who aren't even been through the training to be teachers, right? So the first place we're going to go is these content standards, and that's my understanding. And that's a really strong place to implement this language, because I feel that a lot of teachers at least will know and have a guideline for them, yes, but that it's mandated in some way. It needs to be mandated. And I feel this allows for there to be accountability, in my opinion. This is language that's going to help serve our teachers in building their curriculum and understanding the importance that there are several children, especially in reservation communities, but in border town communities too, to the reservations, that helps them understand their students better, because this language is implemented here.
Okay, so I want to get us on the same page for sure, and we might be, but over here to the right on your screen, it says dissent proposal, move performance descriptors to Chapter 55 Program Delivery Standards for English Language Development. I could be wrong, but that no longer sounds like guidance documents. That sounds like something different, and I want to make sure there's clarification around that. And then I saw Kathy and Bruce and Julie. So that's your stacking order. So Kathy, go ahead.
When I was a literacy coach in Butte and we were doing the Striving Readers grant, we got it for 5 years. and we use standards. The teachers did not know about the program descriptors, or as Danny said, they just weren't exposed to them. So the standards became kind of our operating guide for the teachers in the classroom. And I know they were really important. So to that part of the conversation, I'm just adding that.
I'm this might be nitpicky, but and a little ironic, but because it's academic language, but I think we're using the terms too differently. So there's this set of things that we're looking at, which are the program descriptors. There's this large document called the ARM, which has sections which are called standards. And then there's a guidance document, right? And so the program descriptor block of text is proposed to get moved from the large rules document where it sits under some chapter to the guidance document. But it's not, so we've been doing a lot of discussion about that, but it isn't. So standards are like just a chapter in this large document, and I'm confused because we kind of use these words not quite the same all the time. So saying that, I love the idea of moving this set of performance descriptors into a chapter called standards in the ARM.
Julie?
So I think it's important that chapter 53 are the content standards. And what you had mentioned, Bruce, content standards are what students need to know and be able to do. And the rest of the content, right? The math, the science, all those other ones do not have performance descriptors, okay? This is unique to this particular set there, which is why there was the recommendation from the task force. And when we look at these, and if you could just scroll the screen down a little bit on these performance indicators, because when you start to look at what they say, is that a student who's an emerging level can do this. This is what they understand. This is what they can do. But when they're in a developing level, this is what they can do. Versus if they're expanding, this is what they can do. But in the end, we want them all really to get to a higher level on this continuum as far as they can go, to really be bridging or reaching is what we ultimately want the kiddos to be able to do with English language. Now, I was recommending to put them over in chapter 50, put program delivery standards over into 55, was kind of because I hear Danny saying, right, how do we hold schools accountable to say, we expect you to deliver these content standards, and we expect you to have this happen. My thoughts were that then has a little bit more, I don't know, Bruce, you said something, a little bit more oomph, maybe, I don't know what to say, versus guidance is kind of like, well, use it if you want, right? But maybe if it's in another rule that says we expect you in your delivery of these content standards to utilize these performance descriptors and to use them in a way that will help students along that progression. So I don't even know if my thought was to say, hey, pick them up, copy and paste them exactly as they are over into 55, but is to say, hey, hold them accountable for using these progression levels, which start to talk about what can-do indicators that help guide your delivery of them. To have a little bit more, as Danny's saying, I don't know what the word is, you guys, I'm searching for words, but that was some of my thinking. So Bruce, I'm kind of playing around with a little bit about, well, 53 is about content, which are the 1 through the 5. These are about descriptors of their abilities. We as a group, as a negotiated rulemaking committee, could propose language and say, hey, we propose that in your delivery, you need to do this, rather than it just being in guidance. Thanks.
Okay, so I see Ragna, you have a response, and so this is a good time to be thinking about. So that was a very clear, was clear at least for me, I suspect for others, about your proposal. So this is a time to see how close we're getting to what you're hearing from the group, to an agreeable solution for how to manage the performance descriptors. So Ragna, and then if there are others, just raise your hand.
I'm curious the feedback from educators and the people in that profession, if it's moved out of the content standards and into the delivery standards, if that sounds good. And also, would something stay in content standards? So would there be still a piece of this for ELL in content standards?
Okay, so make yourselves aware you're trying to hear what's being said by each person in the group, and you're trying to move to an agreeable solution for how to manage. It looks like that, to move them, but then what to do with them. So we want to make sure, Ragna said, I'd like to hear from the educators who are on our committee and hear their response. If there are some of you who are willing to help us with this, please just go ahead and do so.
Strictly speaking on what my interpretation of a standard is versus a performance descriptor, it seems the most appropriate space that would still have meat in, I think that's what Bruce said, still have meat in accountability to educators. And I think what I've also heard is this could be an entirely different discussion in terms of accountability for teachers and administrators when it comes to these performance descriptors and the how-tos as well. But if that holds as much meat as keeping them in the standards, then it just, to me, my head just can't keep them in a standard if it's not related to what content is taught.
Okay, I'm going to just provide a little space for any additional questions, clarifications, or comments, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask for dissent on the proposal that you see there written on the right side, that's described as the dissent proposal. And so your job is to be thinking about, yes, someone said, hey, could we take a quick 5-minute break? This is really a good time for it. So I want you to be thinking about, what are we hearing from each person? That's the gift and difficulty of working towards consensus, is it's not either or, it's about and. How can we do this so that it feels like it meets the needs as best we can of the people who have agreed to be a part of this committee? So that's what we'll be looking for, is you want to find that solution. So let's take 5 minutes and have a break. I assume that we can, set this so that either people can turn their cameras off and sound, or we can put a pause on the meeting, and then we'll just be back in 5 minutes. And that will be where we're at in terms of, trying to move ahead with the next step here. So we'll see you back here. What time is it now? It's 1:49. So let's pretend like it's 1:50, and we'll be back at 1:55. Okay.
That would be 2:55 our time.
Oh
Diane.
yeah, that's why I'm in a different. Thank you.
All
Thank
good.
you.
All good. Yep.
All right. We'll see you back here at 2:55. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for returning to the meeting. We look forward to getting started again. Thanks for rejoining us here. Thank you, everyone, for returning to the discussion. We look forward to getting started. Thanks for returning to the Zoom call. We look forward to your return and continuing our discussion. I see you there. As soon as we get enough people on here, you'll be first in line. So Ragda, you must know Gary Lucen. He's a school board member and also a physical therapist there in Bozeman.
I know Gary from when I did my clinical work in Bozeman, but I'm in Missoula. So
Oh,
but I
you're in
know
Missoula.
Gary from quite a ways back.
Oh, very good. We won't tell him it's because he's old. Well, I might tell him. Thanks, everyone, for returning to the Zoom. We look forward to getting started. The benefits of being in person is you can walk around in the hallways and gather people up. Welcome back, Kristen. We're just waiting for a few more to join us. I see Bruce and Danny are still waiting for a few more people to return.
I'm ready with my ideas, Diane. I'm ready.
Yes, I'm very excited.
Can we ask questions while we're waiting, or should we just wait for everybody?
You know, I think there would be more value in waiting on the questions that you have. That way the whole group will have an opportunity to hear the question and the responses.
Perfect.
Yeah. If they're
Did-
important enough to ask, I think it's valuable for the whole committee to hear what those are.
Do we know who we're waiting for by chance?
I just readmitted Kathy back into the room.
I have to leave like right at 3:30. Is that going to be a problem for all things being talked about if someone has to leave? Okay.
Yeah, and we have everyone that was in attendance back in the room.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to bring us back to where we left off, and there is a dissent proposal to move the performance descriptors to Chapter 55 as program delivery standards for English language development. And Ragna has her hand up, and so if there are others, just indicate and we'll get to you after. Oh, I see Danny is there too. So Ragna, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Danny.
Okay, I have I think this is a question potentially. So I was just looking up under other subjects in chapter 23, and it looks to me like most of the content standards in chapter 53, like under mathematics or sciences, there's quite a bit of description about what the standard means within it. And then it looks like under the English language proficiency content standards, it looks like there's the proficiency content, and then the performance descriptors are just like they correlate completely. There's like 5 and 5, but instead of being included in it, it's just sort of like a little separate. So that makes me wonder if anybody else has thoughts on that.
Okay, Danny.
Yeah, so I was looking at that too. I was just trying to look at all of these things too, but this is my caveat here is that because there's no substantial language for ELL, there's not, we have all of these different content standards based on our subject content, but ELL is within each, right? Like ELL is a content standard within each of these different all these different content standards and needs. And so for me, I just feel that it is different. It needs to be different. And I can understand the need to categorize things to make sense or to be cohesive or whatever looks the best regarding, the way the manual needs to be, what have you. But this is important in itself and needs to be understood as such, in my opinion. And what this provides, existing in the content standards, is something that I feel allows for educators of all types and experience levels to see how to implement that at the same time. And I also feel it brings strength to the realization of the cultural differences in language, the linguistic learning abilities, and the way that especially Indigenous people, like, yes, they might grow up speaking English their whole life, but they're around so many people in their community who think and talk and have expectations in a different way that sets their English understanding in a different space, if that makes sense. So we understand language, and we can do all those things, and like the social aspect though is that our interpretation is just different. And so ELL being something that's within all of these different subjects, to me, it deserves to have it needs to have a different level of understanding and attached to it at all times. That's my feeling. So for me, I feel this is better served staying where it's at instead of moving it, only because it needs to be understood that it's implemented in each subject content. And even looking at, everything looks good. There's a lot of continuity in the language and whatnot, but ELL is just different. It's not something you go to school for and just learn ELL. You have to learn ELL in addition to the subject content that you're specializing in. And then ELL comes later in education. So for me, I'm gonna stay situated in seeing this as better served in staying where it's at, as opposed to moving it, only because ELL deserves that recognition and of these specific components to be added in there. So when teachers are looking back to the content standards, they have access to this right away. And I feel that it's better served in that location than moving it out of ARM.
Okay, so your dissent to this proposal for moving the descriptor to Chapter 55 program delivery standards for English language learner developments, your proposal is to keep it where it's at. So I want to make sure that we have more discussion, and your job is to hear what the group is saying and move towards something that can meet the needs for all. So Julie, I see your hand up.
I can totally agree with not moving them to 55, because but I when I was talking about 55, I was talking about creating, not moving, creating how these content standards are delivered and used and like the other ones, not taking these and moving them over there, because I actually don't think they belong in 53 or 55. When I was talking about moving them over there is to say you should be utilizing performance descriptors as information for how you work with English language learners to help them develop the language. And so I'm just going to try to articulate the best I can as to why I don't think they belong in either. And that is because performance level descriptors describe the learner's language across multiple levels. So entering is saying this describes your language ability, but ultimately, right, we actually want them to be able to reach a level 6 is what our goal is. But we know with language, it's not linear. Not everybody reaches it in the same way or the kind of way. And so for me, I think it's a progression of language, of how they use language across that whole continuum. There's a lot of stuff in between the content and where you're at. But I don't want anyone to just be at entering level. Want it to not be utilized as a way to a gatekeeper or defining this is the level you're at. You're at an entering level. You're at an emerging level. We expect all kiddos to get to the level of bridging and expanding. So I just, when I was proposing, I want to be clear, I was never proposing to copy and paste them as they are into 55. I was proposing that there was a way to hold teachers accountable to utilize performance descriptors in their instruction, in the how, if you will. I
So
actually don't believe they belong in either, but that's where I'm at. Thanks.
Okay, so can we correct that the original dissent proposal to reflect, Julie, what you intended as opposed to moving the performance descriptors? You said something about creating. Could you give us the words for that so we know what we're looking at there? And then would that be the work of this group then?
So my original proposal was to create in chapter 55 program delivery standards that hold teachers accountable to how you teach English language learning, which would include the use of performance descriptors, language uses, language expectations. Not to copy and paste these over there, but to hold them accountable to utilizing them, if you will. I hope I said that right.
Thank you for doing that. And then that leaves the question then, what happens with the descriptors in the meantime? So I'm not sure about that, but is there?
I think Danny proposed to keep them where they are.
Okay, so if the performance descriptors in chapter 55, we leave them with the content standards, is there now any dissent to that?
Can you just restate exactly what we're proposing and what we're dissenting or not dissenting, please?
So Maria's trying to capture it here. So in response to Julie's proposal, and she clarified what her proposal is, this was to the original proposal, number 1, keep the performance descriptors in chapter 53 with content standards. And so then additionally, a dissent to that would be, I have to move my faces out of the way. So dissent proposal, create performance descriptors in chapter 55 program delivery standards as a way to hold teachers accountable for how you teach English language learning, including the use of these program descriptors, language expectations. So this is an attempt to marry the two of make sure we have some teeth and some accountability, but it does not keep them in the content standards. That's my understanding of it. And we currently are on then that there is a dissent from that, and it goes back to the original. So I think we need to hear additional members provide their responses to this particular discussion in a way that can help us move ahead. So this isn't voting. This is how do we modify based on what we're learning from each other to come to an agreeable solution for what do we do with the performance descriptors and how will they be managed. Kathy?
I think the proposals that you have there take care of the concerns that I've heard. I just have a side question to ask Danny, because she's been so articulate. I've been out of the classroom for a couple years. And so can you see that this would make a difference in how teachers instruct kids? How you work with teachers, and would that change anything about how they instruct kids? I guess that's my question.
Absolutely. And that's where I'm coming from, is that I see no harm in keeping it where it's at, because that's the number one access point I think educators are drawn to scaffold their lessons, to scaffold their curriculum around. And so I feel it just be better that that language is there, because also because it's ELL and its focus is those who are learning English in a different way. Like there are no, as of right now, there's nothing really driving support for those students except for this kind of language. And there is a huge push through the National Indian Education Association right now for a 10-year movement towards implementing more curriculum for native languages to be added to schools and offered in schools K through college level. So I see how, like, if we don't keep this language here and where it's at for ELL, I feel like it can easily fall to the wayside of teachers not knowing where to go and just having access to it to help provide understanding that ELL is in addition to your subject content area. So this, to me, I feel that's why I feel like it's better served just keeping it here for now. And you know what, if we have more time to implement and change and reword it in a way that is more reflective to better serve our educators who are teaching our children, then yes, I would say move it. But to me, it just seems that it's going to take away than add a better outcome. Like
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Danny.
You bet.
Okay, I think it's a time that we need to hear from each of the members who are part of this committee that are here to help develop and work together to create a solution that takes in the perspectives that have been shared. And so we're just going to start, and that way you can hear from each other. So it's not about me deciding or one person deciding. So listen to the information that's shared in this group, and then let's see where we land on that. So let's go ahead and let's get my screen up here. I'm just going to go down my screen. And Bruce, you're at the top of the screen, and I'd like to, hear, what are you hearing? And any thoughts you have that can help us move ahead as a group to get as close as we can to meeting the needs with a proposal that we can send to the next phase by consensus. And then
Okay.
Kristen, you'll go next.
So I guess what I kind of hear is that it would be great if I don't know if we have this ability, but what we kind of want is to leave these descriptors right where they are, but include in our deliverable, whatever that is, a recommendation that they are they're rewritten in so that they're appropriate for this other area where the chapter 55, I believe. That's what I kind of think we're saying.
Okay, Kristen, then Sue.
Do you want me to go? Is Kristen there? Maybe not.
Okay, our goal is to, what have you heard this group say? And our task is to try and move ahead together and modify in a way that meets the perspectives that you're hearing in the group, not just one, but all. So go
Okay.
ahead and tell us where you're at in terms of what you're hearing and how could we move ahead with this?
Okay, I think that I would rather keep them where they're at, but I would be okay with moving them if that's what people agree. My biggest concern was that I want them to stay as standards rather than be a guidance or whatever you call that. I can't remember now. Guiding principles or whatever they are. But that was my biggest concern, is that they stay as standards.
Okay, and then I had Kristen, but I think Kathy needs to leave right at 3:30. That's at least here from her. And it looks like we're going to need some more time on this. So we'll figure out what those next steps are. So Kathy?
I'm here beyond 3:30 if need be. I wasn't one that had to leave, but I'm hearing that we want to leave that where it's at, and then if possible, to develop some kind of language to put them in the content standards too. So I'm okay with leaving them where they're at, but I do think there needs to be some kind of way to put them in the content standards too. And I know that's a wishy-washy answer, but it seems like that would be the best way to get through this.
Kristen, are you there? Julie?
I struggle because this is on content standards and performance descriptors are not content standards. They describe a snapshot of a student's ability at a particular point in time. And so for me, that's not what I want them to be able to know and do. I want them to be able to know and so it's like, this is where you're at this point in time. And so it's a measurement, not it's a grade. It's like saying you get an A in math, you get a B in math, you have a C in math, you have a D in math. That doesn't tell you what you can know and do in mathematics. And so I don't feel like probably even initially they should have ever been a part of content standards because they're not standards. They're a rating, if you will, of the language ability of a student.
Okay, I want you folks to be listening. If we can end with a proposal for how to move ahead, that's what we want to do. Who's left that we haven't heard from on the committee? Ragna?
So what I hear so far coming forward to me is that there's a number of people that would like to have this left where it is and potentially write something up that would also fit in chapter 55. And Julie, I hear what you're saying about you don't want, sort of the kids to be sort of stuck where they are, but it seems like all of the standards that I look at, if I'm looking at the math or science standards, they all have places where they are being described at a certain point in their time in learning. So if it's the word descriptors that is uncomfortable for you, it's possible that we could change descriptors it to be another word that felt better to you in this place. But I think I hear pretty much everybody saying that there needs to be something within this chapter 53 of these standards, and that this might be the best thing we have going forward.
Hey, Bruce, I saw your hand up.
I was going to say exactly what Ragna said.
Okay, so I'm going to check us out and see where we're at. I'm seeing a proposal now with 2 layers. And if we are not there yet, I want you to be thinking about what do we need to do between now and when we meet next time to be able to make a consensus. Since you're not there yet. So it's the responsibility of the whole group. So the proposal is, you see that proposal number 2, keep the performance descriptors in Chapter 53 content standards. Additionally, people do think that the original dissent proposal to create a performance descriptor, to create a program delivery standards for English language as a way to hold teachers accountable that will include these performance descriptors be put in Chapter 55 under program delivery standards. So it looks now like it's another layer that's added to the original the original proposal. Danny?
I'm just curious, do we have access to these in the meantime? Like, can, as a committee here, in the meantime, can we do we have access to this specific document that we can look at? So I feel like I'd be so much more on top of it and more helpful to this committee if I could read through these and offer more valuable, having done a little more research.
Hey, I'm going to let Marie speak directly to that.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't get some of the documents until a little later, and so I didn't know if this was specifically in there. So if that's the case, Marie, then that's wonderful. And I feel like that would be really helpful in the meantime until the next session of this, to have a well-articulated understanding on all sides.
Okay, so for the group, because we're on a tight timeline here, so we do need to move ahead. I'd like the committee to talk about what do we need to know for next. Is there anything that we can look at that would help us come up with a proposal that both meets the need for, you call it meet in the attached somehow to the standards. And the other is the question about, does the current descriptors belong in the ARM right now? So it says the site was shared in the invitation and has all needed materials and links. So in our, Maria's showing us how to access these materials. And I'm going to remind you that your role of consensus is to be listening to everyone in the group around all of the pieces of information that's provided. And it looks like people are saying they need more time to fully understand that. If they don't belong in the ARM and they belong somewhere else, but we still want meat, it seems to be that those are the 2 places for which you're having a difficult time landing on a proposal to move into the next phase by consensus. So I'll remind you that the way that it works is we get a chance to make it as good as we can based on listening to each other and modifying in response to what we're hearing from each other. And then it will go again to the superintendent of public instruction for additional revisions prior to moving to the ARM. Danny, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just, I was asked a question and I answered it, but then I didn't actually get to speak what I heard as a committee member.
Okay, go for it, Dan.
Everyone else, but
Yeah.
Julie, I do understand what you're saying, and I like that's what I mean. Like I can agree with having to move it somewhere, but I want to have a plan of what to do with it before it just disappears from that place. And so I do like my thing is I'm not trying to get stuck on something. I just want to make sure that it doesn't fall to the wayside, and I want to do some digging and try and see where could be the best fit. And so I actually look forward to doing that so that I can perhaps offer some additional insight. Thank you.
Danny, I threw a link in the chat there. That WIDA site has lots of in-depth information.
Excellent.
I think would be a helpful resource. So I just wanted to add that there. And then Marie, will you be sure to add that link to our resource tab on the website so that if indeed we close off here and we forget where it was, we can go back and look at it. Thank you.
And then I'm wondering, Julie, I heard you make a statement of, well, I don't think it belongs here and I don't think it belongs there. But is there any way that people can sort of see and kind of evaluate and understand what you're talking about? Is there anything available for them to
So
understand
Diane,
that?
that's why I put the, there is another place that might be helpful, but and I'll put it in the chat and I'll be sure Marie puts it in the resource. But I think the WIDA, which is where these standards are derived from, and just going in and being able to read that can provide some, you know, helpful information. And then I'm going to have her put up here guidance documents on how these are actually utilized in practice, if you will, or recommended to be utilized. And so I'll put that other link in there right now and be sure that Marie has it as well.
Thank you. I think that'll really help. So I need someone to talk about, and this might not happen, but I think it's important to understand. If you move ahead to create the delivery methods, I don't have it in front of me, what would that look like? This is a question for those in OPI that can help us, you know, with the structure of how this moves ahead. Because I know we do have a time limit on some of this.
So Diane, if the group was to create, right, program delivery standards, they're actually not the descriptors.
Yes.
Program delivery standards have two components the way it's designed. It's it's both the, oh my gosh, I can't even think right now, but there's two components of it. It's like the context and then the delivery. I have to think about what the two are. So we would actually have to draft that up because we don't have it. But the documents of the two links there would give the group to say, hey, when you go to deliver this content, here's some expectations that you need to be held to as you do that. So that would be what we would need to do. So we would be really kind of crafting it, if you would. We have models of how other content do it. We have information on, and I just put in there like guidance documents so you could see what guidance documents look like. But that's what we would have to do.
Okay, so the reason that I'm asking, because as facilitator, thinking about a schedule for that, that could take some time. So if that were going to be what we do so that it has some meat, then we would want to accommodate a time for that. And so for those of you who have, what would that look like in terms of this committee and getting together again?
I'm pretty flexible at this point. So whatever anyone else is feeling they can do, I'm happy to hear it as well.
Marie, do you have some thoughts around managing the calendar? And people will need time to look at the documents that Julie sent.
I
We
don't, but
start
I can.
WIDA screening soon too, so we're gonna be going dark here in Billings to get kids screened. So I don't have really 3 hours is the only problem here.
So I can send out polls to the committee.
Mhm.
Kristen,
Kristen-
in the polls, do you want some variety of times, like early mornings, late, like 4 o'clock after school time? Do you want
Just-
some variety?
Yeah, just put some variety in there. It just, we have over 100 kids showing up on our home language surveys K5 that need screening here in the next, according to you guys, 14 days.
Those darn guidance documents.
Those OPI people, I'm telling you what.
Yeah.
Yeah, just put some choices and we can kind of look from there.
We'll do
Okay,
that.
so this information that's being provided, there's an expectation that when we come back together, that you'll have really looked that over and made yourself familiar with it so that we can, get right to work with those questions answered and, be able to dig right in. And so is there any disagreement or with the folks that are on the committee to investing the time to review those documents and be prepared to move ahead with that second proposal we're working on? Okay, we trust that you're going to do that, and it would be nice to have a little bit of a closure if everyone can stay just 5 more minutes and just start with the committee members. And Ragnar, you're on top this time, and so if you could just say, here's how I'm feeling, and here's my hopes for when we get back together. And your microphone, if you'll turn it on. Here's how I'm feeling about our
Thank you.
first meeting.
Thank
And
you.
yeah,
I just want to thank everybody for your time and your thoughts. And I feel like this is really important. And I'm feeling strongly about having something be in the standards and not sure what that looks like. I also am a little bit concerned about a committee of non-educators putting forward what they think should be in the chapter 55. So I'm not exactly sure that we're the right committee for that, but I'm open to being a part of it. And I think that sums it up. So thanks everybody.
hey Bruce.
Yeah, I also thank everybody for working so hard on all of this. And I think I kind of mirror Ragna's comments that we seem to be, I kind of love this process that's been created by the legislature to make this all work this way, but there seems to be like overlap between task force jobs and our jobs when it comes to this point where there's controversy over what's been proposed. So it's kind of interesting to watch how this all is going to play out over the next few meetings or one more meeting.
Kathy?
I appreciate being part of this. It's interesting to see how this is developed. I appreciate the committee's concern for public education in Montana and going forward with what's best for kids. I think there is a good committee for doing that. Thank you.
Okay, Sue, Julie, and Danny. Sue, Julie, and Danny. Okay, Julie and Danny.
I thank you to the group for the passion and dedication and time and thought. It was really good to be in a discussion that has meaning for our students in Montana. So that's powerful and makes me humbled to be among a group of people that bring that passion to the conversation. And so I'm very hopeful. I think that this group has accomplished a lot in what is a very short amount of time.
Okay, Danny and then Sue. And who am I missing, Marie? From the committee.
Kristen.
Kristen's waving.
Kristen, I'm sorry, I can't see everybody. So Danny, Kristen, and Sue.
Yeah, I echo that appreciation to everybody taking the time to discuss all of these challenging and not super, like, it's, this is a space where a lot of things aren't super clear and have never really been super clear for everybody. So I think this provides more transparency for us to learn from each other and work towards an effort that's going to have better outcomes for our students. So thank you all for also listening to me and considering some of my recommendations and the things that I've shared. I really appreciate that. And thank you for allowing for me to learn from all of you as well.
Okay, Kristen, and then I'll keep Sue on the list.
All right. Well, this has been fascinating. I thought, oh dear God, 3 hours. And then I'm like, oh, this is pretty fun. So no, I do appreciate everybody's input, and there's two things niggling at me. One is, and again, this is we could have a whole nother meeting regarding accountability among teachers and if they're doing what they should do. So what's niggling is, does it matter? Is it really going to, what the accountability piece is going to look like, no matter where it goes? And Danny, I really appreciate you bringing, your cultural experience to the table, because I would never die on a hill that would usurp a cultural experience that I've never had. And so that is always, as we work through this, that's those are two things that I'm like, yeah, I don't have that experience. I can't speak to that. So I appreciate your input. So yeah, it's actually been an enjoyable 3 hours.
Okay, can we get a Sue? I wonder if maybe we lost Sue. Okay, so the committee is going to review those documents, get a full understanding of what belongs in the ARM and what maybe belongs elsewhere, and explore the potential for having not the descriptors moved to, but creating delivery standards that would include the descriptions as part of them. And so the committee members will get themselves informed around that and ready to listen to each other and move towards consensus around that last part that we have left from our discussion today. And I think OPI is going to help us get scheduled for some time that really allows for us to be able to do that. I believe that the links are already on our own little web page, which is also available to the public. So they will have a chance to see that. I'll be reviewing the notes that OPI so generously helped support us with today. And so those will be reviewed by me before they get sent out to the committee, so that we make sure that I'm seeing the same things that were recorded before they come to you. And is there a time frame for which we usually you're usually able to turn those around? Does anyone have experience with that?
We should have a draft to you tomorrow, Diane.
Okay, and I will get right on that to turn that back around myself. So I think that's it. That's the next steps that we have. And, you know, as much as I thought, oh, it'll be wonderful if we could get it done in 3 hours. I've been doing this work too long to think it's predictable in that way. And I appreciate you making space for each other and considering how can we move ahead together. You are just moving this to the next phase in this process, and we're getting it as good as we can to support the rest of the rulemaking process. And so I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to working with you again. And with that, I think we can close. Is there anything I'm missing? Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much. And we'll see you again. And we'll be ready to go.